All right. So this week we are going to talk about percentages. And you've probably seen percentages all over the place before because we really like to talk about them when we talk about data and sometimes when we talk about things like grades. And percentages are a lot like ratios because percent means per 100. So they're essentially a way that we write fractions or ratios where the bottom part is 100. And so we get to this point where there are a lot of ways that we can write the same thing. So let's say our thing is 50%. Well, we could write that as 50 out of 100. Or we could write that as 50 to 100. Or we could even write that as the decimal 0.5. Right? And these all mean the same thing. They all are the same as 50%. It's just a different way to write it. And so when we change between decimals, fractions, ratio, and percentages, there's some math that we have to do in order to make that work. So here's our first example. Change 64% to a decimal, a fraction, and a ratio. Let's do fraction first. So we'll do fraction here in blue. And what we do is we just take that 64, we put it on top, and we put 100 on the bottom. Done. Well, it is done, but we can do better. We could reduce this to simplest form, right? So we think, okay, what goes into 64 and also into 100? Well, what about 4? I'm pretty sure 4 goes into both of those. So we do 64 divided by 4 and 100 divided by 4, and we end up with 16 over 25, which I do believe is in simplest form. I can't think of anything that goes into both of those numbers. And that would be our nice fraction for 64%. I'm going to swap colors here to green. And we're going to do ratio next, because you already know how to turn a fraction into a ratio. And so our ratio here would just be 64, right? The top number goes first, to 100, or 16 to 25. We already talked about going in between fractions and ratios, so those are basically the same thing. The odd man out is decimal. Alright, so what we do to convert a percentage to a decimal is we write down our number here, 64%, and we are going to divide it by 100. So 64 divided by 100 is equal to 0.64. Now that's what you would get if you put it into a calculator, but you might also notice a pattern here. When we divide by 100, we can also take the number, and remember that this is the same thing as 64.0, and we can move the decimal point 2 spaces to the left, which gives us the same thing, 0.64. So you have 2 ways to do this one. And I'm just going to write them down so that we remember. So you can divide by 100 in a calculator, however you like. Or we can move decimal to left. Easy peasy. All right, we're going to do one more example of this. So, this time our ratio is 45 to 100, and we're going to change it to a fraction, a decimal, and a percentage. So, whether in the last question we started with a percent, this time we're starting with the ratio. All right, so fraction. This is easy. We just take the first number and put it on top, the second number and put it on the bottom, And if we wanted to reduce to simplest form, we could divide both of these by, 5? I do these notes live, kids. I have not figured this out in my head beforehand. 45 divided by 5 is 9. And then 100 divided by 5 is 20. And that looks pretty good to me. I believe that is in simplest form. All right. And then we want to put it into a decimal. Now, how do we change a fraction into a decimal? Well, it's always just the top number divided by the bottom number. And you might remember from up here when we divided by 100, this is going to be the same as moving the decimal point 2 spaces to the left. So I know this is going to be 0.45. You could also do 9 divided by 20 on your calculator, and you should get the same thing. So that's decimal. And then for percentage, I'm going to choose orange. We want to do the opposite. We take 0.45 and we times it by 100 to get 45%. Or we take 0.45 and we move the decimal 2 spots, this time to the right. 1, 2, and we get 45%. All right? Not so bad, not so bad. And then this last one here asks us what percentage is 3 over 5. So we're starting with a fraction here. And our first step is because it's hard to make a fraction directly into a percentage unless it has 100 on the bottom. Our first step is going to be to convert this to a decimal. And we do that by doing 3 divided by 5. And we're going to get a nice decimal on our calculator when we do this. We are going to get 0.375, or 0.38 if you are going to round it. All right. Sorry, this is step 1. Step 2, we are going to convert the decimal, to a percentage. So, 0.375 times 100. You could do that in your calculator, but I'm going to move the decimal spot over. 1, 2 is going to give us 37.5%. You can have a decimal inside of a percentage, but if you were going to round this, you would round it to 38%. All right, I think this is going to be part 1 of this video, and then part 2 will be working with more percentages with word problems and figuring out how to find the percentage of a number.